Alright, so this is Unit 6, Cognition and Memory. This is Video 5. This is going to talk about forgetting, why we forget. The information can be found on 278 to 284. Okay, so let's kind of refresh our minds in terms of sensory, short-term, long-term. Okay, we went back to the 3-box model. Okay, and what happens in your long-term memory that causes you to forget? Okay, so those are the issues that we're going to be talking about. All right, so why do we forget? What if we could remember everything? We are going to talk about this lady who actually remembers every single thing that she's ever experienced in her life. Her name is Jill, okay, and we will see a video, but imagine what your life would be like if you could remember every single detail. Yes, it would be awesome, but you'd have these constant thoughts and images going through your mind in terms of the different memories and the experiences that you have. So sometimes it's probably good that we shift and we throw some of our facts away because then we're not constantly going. But yes, she is one of the bizarre cases or really, really unique cases where somebody can remember every single thing, kind of like having a photographic memory. Okay, the Schatzner, in terms of forgetting, he came up with there's 3 sins for forgetfulness. One reason maybe why we're forgetting is we're absent-minded. Our mind is somewhere else, which causes us to have encoding failure, so we didn't encode it properly in terms of putting it away properly for storage. Okay, so we didn't do that effortful processing correctly. Transience, we had decay. Okay, so it's unused and it fades in our long-term memory, so we don't continue to encode it, and rehearse it. And then there's that lack of rehearsal, which causes the blocking or the tip of the tongue, encoding failure again, where we haven't necessarily rehearsed it in a while. We also have 3 things for distortion that cause us for forgetting. Misattribution, we're actually putting words in the mouth and confusing the sources of information, so we're not necessarily encoding it properly. Suggestibility, people's influences can influence us. Misattribution leads us to suggestibility. Why did Miss Gavin give us homework? Oh wait, she gave us homework? Are you sure she gave us homework? So kind of the thoughts of that. And then bias, feeling towards something could mask the true feelings. So we have a bias towards some sort of memory, which can impact whether or not we're going to remember it properly. Okay, and then intrusion, the persistence, maybe unwanted memories keep haunting you, which could maybe influence why we're forgetting certain details of other memories. That can be another reason. So 3 big areas of why we forget is it looks at encoding failure, it looks at storage and decay, and then it looks at the retrieval. In order to get it out of our memory bank, we can't retrieve it properly. So the first one is encoding failure. We didn't encode it properly. So much of what we sense, we never notice, and what we fail to encode, we never remember. We just fail to encode the information. Age can definitely impact this. No matter how young we are, we selectively attend to a few of the sights and sounds we are exposed to. We're never going to encode every single detail, especially if it's not significant to us. We probably won't remember it. So you got your sensory memory there, you paid attention to it, it then goes into your working or your short-term memory. So then you're going to encode it, but some sort of encoding failure happens, and that's why it never gets stored away correctly into our long-term memory. Okay? An example of this would be pennies. If I had you just look at the 6 pennies that are there, which one represents the back of the penny? Okay, over and over and over on studies when people do this, they can't select the correct penny of what it actually is, because when you're worrying about pennies, a lot of times you don't really pay attention to the little details about the dates and what's the face structure and the different terms that are on the penny. Okay, we encode some of the information, however, some takes effort and we take some for granted. Okay, so in reality, if you look at kind of this little drawing here, the first penny is the real penny. Okay, it does say Liberty, it does have the year on it, and then it says, "In God We Trust." Storage decay is another thing that happens in terms of why we have problems with our memory. Even if we encode something well, we forget it. No matter how many times you rehearse it, you're going to forget it. Without rehearsal, we forget things over time. Ebbinghaus came up with the forgetful curve. Okay, Ebbinghaus forgetful curve. After learning a list of nonsense syllables, Ebbinghaus studied how much we retain up to 30 days later. He found that memory for novel information fades quickly and then levels out. So usually time and days since we learned the list, usually you forget about, here it's you forgot 30% right away, and then you start leveling out where you remember a percentage of those terms for a long period of time. So usually the retention drops right away. Information fades quickly and then it starts leveling out in terms of storage decay. So if you were to take a test on, let's say we just took our test on consciousness, okay, you might remember it the next day, all the material, and then maybe the day right after it. And unless you're rehearsing it every single night, you're probably going to forget about 30% of that information just because you're not rehearsing it. Okay, that's why I'm continuously quizzing you on different bits of information for the final, because I want you to relearning. When you relearn it, it tends to be easier for you to relearn it the second, the third, the fourth time. Another example of the forgetting curve would be Spanish learned in high school. Compared with people just completing a Spanish course, those 3 years out of the course remembered much less. Okay, so you're going to remember time and years after completing the course. Okay, a couple months after learning it, you're going to have a good retention, and then a year after, and maybe 10 years, 20 years later, it's going to start leveling off in terms of what you can remember. Retrieval failure. Okay, so now that you've encoded it, you have problems retrieving it. Learning some new items may interfere with retrieving the old items, especially when they're similar, or some of the old information can cause you some issues with retaining the new information. So you have problems with maybe you're learning new information and you can't remember the old stuff then, or you have this old stuff and it has a hard time with sticking with the new stuff. Okay, so the third part that we're talking about is retrieval failure. You have two types of interference. You have retroactive interference, and then you have proactive interference. Retroactive interference is when a new memory interferes with the old information. So an example of this is you remember your new phone number, but you can't remember the old. So all the new stuff is what you remember. You can't remember any of that old stuff. Another example of this would be learning a new language interferes with the ability of remembering the old language. Okay. So you remember a new memory interferes with remembering the old stuff. So you can't remember the retro time period. You just remember what's going on now. Another example or a definition of retroactive interference is the disruptive effect of new learning on the recall of old information. This is when maybe you remember this year's locker combination and you forget last year's. Proactive interference is the opposite of retroactive. This is when an old memory interferes with remembering the new information. So memories of where you parked your car last week are causing you not to remember where you parked it today. So you keep thinking of the previous proactive information. Another example of proactive interference is the disruptive effect of prior learning on the recall of new information. So we have this gentleman, he keeps remembering his old girlfriend's name, and so when he calls or he talks to his new girlfriend, he accidentally says the old girlfriend's name. Okay, this might be another example is I've had some of your brothers and sisters, and I call you your brother and sister's name. Okay, that's interfering with me to be able to understand your name. Right, so proactive inference. Alright, so looking at reviewing of all the reasons why we may forget. Okay, forgotten events are like books you can't find after high school. Could be 3 reasons why you can't find that books. Some is because you did not encode it. Right, so they were never acquired. You never got them. You never stored them anywhere. Others because when you did store them, you kind of, after a while, you just threw them away. Storage decay. And then the third reason why is because you don't have enough information, you don't remember where you put them, or exactly, maybe you can't find them because you don't know the location of where you put them away at. Retrieval failure. Another problem with retrieval is how motivated are you for forgetting. So sometimes you could have problems retrieving information is because of repression. This is where the memory was so bad or caused so much anxiety, which is we choose to just forget it and put it in our subconscious and not even think about it. In the psychoanalytical theory, it's a defense mechanism to help us. It banishes the anxiety-arousing thoughts and feelings and memories from our consciousness. And we just choose not to remember it. So we forget it. To recap, we talked about forgetting, we talked about encoding failure, storage failure, and then we talked about the different types of inference.